There we go. The session is being recorded and transcribed. Awesome. Hey, welcome back, everyone. It is 11 a.m. on the West Coast here, and I have Michael Hayes from Media 3 talking about OAuth 2.0. A lot of security, fun stuff in ColdFusion. I know this is always a very popular topic. In chat, I just want to make sure people are seeing this in chat. Who's excited about Auth? Let's see you guys tell me. Come on. Yeah, there you go. Authentication. This is hard stuff, right? And Michael is going to tell us how to make it easy, right? So very cool. Folks, if you have questions, there is a Q&A pod. Please use that because the chat is going to get wild and crazy. I don't want to lose questions. I want to make sure that Michael will be able to answer them. But in the meantime, we are off and running. And so over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So I want to say thank you to Adobe for another awesome developer week. Hopefully everybody's here to learn some cool stuff and dive into some cool demos. So that being said, let's dive right in. So today I'm going to be going over OAuth 2.0. Just a little bit about myself before I dive in. I'm a solutions architect at Media 3. I've been a full stack developer for about a decade now, and my focus is on ColdFusion and PowerShell. So those are the two languages I work with the most, other than some HTML, clearly. But yeah, so I mean, over my experience, I've worked with thousands of companies, and having done so, I need the means and mechanisms to authenticate securely to all of these subservices, APIs, all of these accounts. And how I achieve all of that is the magical OAuth 2.0 specifically. So a little bit about myself, apart from just IT and tech. Big into music, listen to all sorts of music. So if you ever see me at one of the summits and you have a good band, I'd love to talk some music with you guys. Some other facts about me is big into science and abstract concepts. So I watch a lot of documentaries and things on math and just crazy kind of out there ideas. TV, watch a lot of Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, and recently I've been turning into a podcast guy. So watch Huberman podcast, Diary of a CEO. So yeah, diving right into the meat of everything. What is OAuth? So I always describe OAuth as your entryway to a whole world of services, specifically with Entra. It's a gateway to a whole ecosystem of services. When I make this circular representation, I will explain that a little bit more in a bit. But OAuth is an open authorization and is an open standard for access delegation, commonly used to grant websites or applications limited access to users' data. So opposed to handing someone your username and password, and then every API request that happens after that, using those credentials, you get a nice time-bound token, commonly referred to as a JWT token, and that has all sorts of information embedded inside of it. I'm not going to go too far into JWT today, but just know that OAuth, once you actually perform a request and you get a token back, that is nothing but a JWT token. So it is a way to have your credentials stay within the identity provider, and from a developer's point of view, this makes your life significantly easier because now there's not tables, hashes, encryption, all of that stuff that typically you have to take to manage usernames and passwords securely. So this is going to offload a lot of the work that typically you as a developer would have to take and put that on the big guys that have the manpower to build out these systems very securely. So dealing with modern cloud solutions like Microsoft, GCP, AWS, all of these have a IDP or identity provider that you're able to tap into. And this is where all of the complexity really gets taken away. So it's not just an authentication protocol, but it is for granting access and not providing identity, or not providing identity. There's some other protocols that you might hear me say, such as OpenID. Those really intertwine here, but the focus on today's concept is going to be all things OAuth. So why should you care as a developer for OAuth? It is going to abstract a lot of the authentication and authorization so you can build futures and not login screens. So I'm sure many of you have been, eager to get going with your development project, and you're still dealing with building out these systems that are sending MFA emails or sending a secure SMS message. And along with that comes other dependencies, such as Twilio or SMTP. So eliminating that, making it so you can just hit the ground running and have an authentication system securely and easily is really why that matters most from a developer's point of view. Eliminating credential headaches. So like I said, you're not having to maintain a table with usernames and passwords, which for obvious reasons, that comes with complexity and security risk. Reduces the risk of password leaks, breaches, and compliance liabilities. So depending on what your organization does, there might be specific compliance regulations that you need to maintain, such as, SOC 2, GDPR if you're in Europe. So a lot of these are able to be combated much easier when you are on modern cloud. And they are built for scale. So depending on the authentication mechanism that you're using, I mean, it's always going to be OAuth behind the scenes, but you can get your authentication down to sub 100 milliseconds. So I'm not going to go too far into that today for managed identity and the IMS, or internal metadata service. But if you are using that, you can take your authentication and really get that entirely done in under 100 milliseconds every time. So very quick, it's meant for scale, and there is a vast ecosystem of third-party integrations. So having worked with this over the past 10 years, I've seen this protocol evolve time and time again. And it seems like it just keeps getting closer and closer together. So if we look over here at the left-hand side of this little timeline, this was the RFC that was created for the OAuth 2.0 protocol and all of the various grant types that came along with it. As this evolves, security requirements get harder and harder to deal with. And from my experience, these changes and requirements get closer and closer together. So designing for what I call deprecation, where your authentication mechanisms are going to change at some point, or they might get more complex as time goes on, having things be decoupled and isolated in individual components, or now until 2025, you don't even need any custom code. You can have it just right in, you can have your OAuth authentication right in there with ColdFusion natively, which is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Hats off to Adobe. I'm very excited about this release. So just to give you a little bit more context on why some of these OAuth changes matter, because as a tier 1 partner at Media 3, we're a tier 1 partner with Microsoft, and they hold us to a very high caliber for security. So along with that, there's something called the secure application model. And it's something I'm not going to go into today, but this secure application model is something that, not being a partner, you can still adopt these concepts and make sure that your entire system is as secure as you really can possibly get it. And then a little bit of the roadmap for where OAuth 2.0 is going to be heading over the next couple of years is it is going to be revamped to work with agentic AI, which is very, very interesting. There's a protocol called Model Context Protocol. Depending on your level of understanding and knowledge with AI, you may or may not have heard of this. But just know over the next couple of years that Microsoft, in collaboration with Anthropic, are going to be working on revamping the OAuth 2.0 protocol to be able to have identities or agents authenticate as their own specific type of identity. That is going to really open up the floodgates for all of these agentic agents that people are just won't stop talking about. So, brief little timeline of what OAuth is, why it matters, and Yes, one other thing before we kind of dive into the meat, into the fun demos. This is the same timeline that you will see that I just went over. This beautiful graphic right here is what I meant by the entryway to this whole ecosystem of resources. MS Graph or Microsoft Graph really is the underlying service that taps into all of these other APIs and other services. So making that connection to Entra, which is only done using OAuth, opens up a whole world of opportunities. And you might not be using Microsoft for your actual infrastructure. You might be using that for things such as Outlook or Word or Excel. You're able to tap into those services if you're not on Microsoft Cloud or you're not actually using the infrastructure. You can still leverage a lot of these services without actually having to move your applications to the cloud. So, and then a little bit more of a streamlined visual for some of these services. In the top right corner here, what I will point out is when they mean build your experience, having worked with OAuth, I read this as different grant types. So depending on how you're authenticating, whether it's a user interaction on a web application or a backend service that is authenticating to APIs, you will use a different grant type. So the main grant type out of the 6 that I will be focusing on today is authorization code grant type. And we'll go into that, but typically that's going to be the one that as a web developer, you're going to want to focus on. And if you learn that one, the other ones are pretty much the same process with a couple variable tweaks. So if you understand that singular grant type, you'll understand the others. And demo. So 3 demos I'm going to be going over today. One of them I'm going to be using CF Entra, which was an application that Media 3 just released 2 weeks ago. That is entirely free to anybody to use. It is entirely geared for ColdFusion developers and for quickly and rapidly integrating with Entra. So that being said, let me get some links pulled up. Can everybody see my stream fine? Awesome. So the first thing I will go over here is logging into the actual application. If you do not have a Microsoft login, they do have a free sign up where you're able to sign up for $200 of free credits. Also, if you're using something like Outlook, you're probably able to use your existing username and password to log in. Depending on the organizational restrictions that your company might have, you might have to request access from admins in your organization to log in. But for the most part, you should be able to just click log in using the button in the top right. After you sign in, you will be brought directly in and you can start integrating. So I've already previously consented to this application, so it brought me right in. If you're following along with me, which you can at media3.net cf-entra, you will be presented with a consent screen. This is going to ask you to consent to the permissions that the API is requesting. And I will make a note that this is asking for application read-write scope, which means that this app will have permission to create and delete applications inside of your tenant. For security reasons, if you do not want to grant that access after you are done with this, I do have a document in here on how you can go and remove that. I also will be rotating applications every couple of months to make sure that there's not an application sitting around, access into all sorts of tenants. So just keep that in mind. From a security point of view, there's a document on how to remove an Entra app from your tenant. So diving in, I will start the integration process. And first thing I will do is provide a simple name. There are predefined application scopes that I have here. And the reason I went this route is to eliminate the likelihood that people grant over-permissive applications or scopes to your application registration. It's very easy to grant too many permissions that your application really needs to perform its job. There's something known as constant access evaluation, where as your application needs more permissions, you request access as it's needed, and you don't just grant this application all sorts of permissions from the get-go. So the reason why I went with predefined application scopes was to help people adhere to the principle of least privilege and further adopt the Zero Trust framework. So for this example, I will select the MS Graph. The scopes that are specified in the MS Graph application type are the application scopes that are shown in the examples on Adobe ColdFusion's documentation. And here you will specify a redirect URL. I will point out that the redirect URL, if you are not using a local host for the domain name, it has to be HTTPS, otherwise it won't work. If you are running locally, you are able to do HTTP with localhost, but for today's example, I'm going to be using a demo site that I already have pre-configured. And after creating the application, you'll see a pretty basic page that I have. This is a JSON configuration with the variables that you will need in order to perform the authentication. So I have an example available on my GitHub. So if you go to the footer of the application on CF Entra and you are following along, you can navigate over to ColdFusion Azure Components. I also have links right here. So I'll stay here for a moment and check in with chat if anybody wants to follow along and scan these and pull these up. The one on the left is for CF Entra. The one on the right is for the example that I'm going to be showing in a moment. Give another 30 seconds or so to let people load those up. So this is CF Entra, and then for GitHub, let me get that GitHub pulled up. Then this is the examples. So if you are following along, I'm going to continue into the example now, unless anybody wants me to hold off for a moment. So diving in, which I'll re-go through that process. So we add a demo app, select the predefined application scope, and we will give it a redirect URL. This redirect URL is going to bounce you back, or that's where you're going to be redirected back to after a successful authentication flow. So if we grab the config that it provides, and I pull over my demo over here, You really can just copy and paste that config directdirectly into that .env file that is on the get OAuth access token example. So this would be the .env file that you would use, and then the index.cfm file is going to be where the actual ColdFusion logic lives. And after you have your index.cfm and your env file populated with the necessary values, you can select log into application. And that is embarrassing. To modify my physical path. Try that again. Okay. So what happened right there was I went over to my ColdFusion application. I have some really down and dirty logic that is really just checking for the presence of a URL parameter. If the URL code is not there, it starts the request. Otherwise, it finishes the request. And this is going to have you log in. This screen, and I will point out the importance of this screen, because what this does is this allows you a chance to do your due diligence to make sure you do not accept over-permissive applications. We created this application, so therefore we trust this. But if you're using a third-party application, this gives you a chance, again, to do your due diligence to make sure you trust the company and you trust the applications. When you logged into CF Entra, you might have noticed that we showed as a verified publisher because we are a Microsoft partner. This is a demo tenant that I have, so this is not showing as verified. But really make sure that you check the scopes and permissions that this is asking for before you click accept. I've heard some nightmare stories. That's not to scare you. It's just to make sure that you are aware that the consent framework is a big part of OAuth. And then after authenticating, you get brought right in, and we have simple little user interface that I've coded in a couple minutes. This is going to give you the scopes, the access token, which is really the bearer token that you will use for all of your API requests. And one thing I will point out here is you can take these tokens, you can decode them using tools such as jwt.ms. This site never leaves your browser. This is entirely client-side, so it's very secure to use. And this is one way and one tool that you will come across when you are debugging OAuth applications. A good practice to take is to use whatever platform you are integrating with. So in this case, it would be Microsoft Graph. To actually use their portal and use the networking tab. So if you come over here, to your networking tab and developer tools, you can grab the JWT tokens that are there and plop them in here and make sure that your applications are configured from a working example. So you can pretty much reverse engineer from a working example and then configure your applications to have all of these settings. I'm not going to delve too far into configuring these applications. Hopefully the CF Entra utility allows you to reduce that learning curve and kind of hit the ground running quicker. But if you find yourself batting your head against a wall and you're trying to configure something inside of Microsoft Entra's app registrations, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I work on this stuff all day, so I'm happy to, assist or consult as needed. Yeah, so I guess that is the really down and dirty demo for OAuth. This specific grant type is using the authorization code grant type, which is typically the most common one that you will come across. One thing I will mention as well is some of the claims that you will see in here. So all of these different key values that you'll see in this JSON object are known as claims. And this MFA one, stands for multi-factor. And sometimes you will find services that require this claim to be present in order to work. So authorization code grant type is the only way that you can have multi-factor enabled with these authentication flows and be able to confirm that all their security checks and balances have been met before actually allowing a user into the application. So yes, probably be a good time for questions, and I can jump into the next demo. So any questions before I move on? Alrighty. So the next demo that I have here is something called MGT Dev Toolkit. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I found this SDK and toolkit a couple of years ago, and the very first thing that was into my mind, or that popped into mind, was the similarities between ColdFusion and the toolkit that I found here. So let me go back over here. So I will send this URL right here in the chat. This is a link over to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And where this isn't ColdFusion focused right now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because with the release of 2025, I would very much like to see some integrations that are similar to what you see inside of this toolkit. So one of the things that made ColdFusion thrive was a minimal learning curve from people who are HTML developers or web developers, and being able to bring in tag-based options for powerful integration. If you look at the tags right here, I'm sure some of you can see similarities with things like CF query. It was the most beautiful thing in the world when I was able to run a CF query, and all of a sudden, as a very novice developer 10 years ago, to be able to be pulling data from a database in a couple lines of code that looked so similar to the HTML that I was already familiar with. That's why I'm mentioning this. And with 2025 release, I believe it's possible for integrations such as this to make its way into the ColdFusion community. So that's why I'm doing this demo. That's why I am explaining this SDK, although it is not ColdFusion focused. I would like to see some tags in the very near future that are CF-login, and allow some of these awesome integrations to make its way into the ColdFusion community. So that being said, I will give you a quick little run through of the next demo. So using the CF Entra toolkit, or not toolkit, but application, you can find some of the values that you will need with this demo. Really, the only values that we're going to need here are a singular client ID, and then depending on the way the application is set up, you might need the tenant ID. Both of those are able to be found in the CF Entra application. I will show you how to obtain those in a moment. And yeah, so I will take this application ID from the previous example that I created. If I plop this in right here, it's really the only thing that you will need to change here. I'm I'm going to change this value to be my tenant. So this can be your tenant ID, which is like a GUI ID or unique identifier for your account, or you can use the domain name that's specified. That domain name is pre-configured for you and provided to you once you create an account. And that's really all you need there. So what we will see is a very basic page with just a sign-in button. And this is all being rendered from this little bit of code up here. And the actual login is being shown and utilized from this line on line 23. These examples are also available on my GitHub, underneath the examples repository that I shared earlier. So if you want to go ahead and follow along with that, I'll slow down for a moment as well. Once you have that in place, you load that up, and we click sign in. Oh. Okay. I'm using a wrong application. So bear with me a moment. You can use the handy dandy CF Entra. And I have a application already set up. Changed this right before got on this call, so regretting that now. Bear with me one moment. Here we go. Right. So I needed to grab a different application ID. But I'll load this up right here. What we will see is the ability to sign in. Oh. Redirect URL. I guess this is a good time to show where you grab some of these values. So this is the application that I have configured. It's slightly different than the ones that get set up with CF Entra. The only difference being loading things as a single page application opposed to a web application. Not going to get into that today, but there are some added security benefits that come with using an SPA or single page app. So let me get this pulled up. There we go. We can see that actually silently just signed me in because I've previously logged in here. Messy looking page, but what I will show you guys next is really the simplicity of how to integrate with these services. Again, the reason why I am looking at this toolkit is specifically because I see such a strong similarity with ColdFusion, specifically tag-based programming, and being able to bring in powerful integrations with very little code. So over the next couple of months, I do plan on at least getting a CF login tag going and having that use an env file to contain all of the authentication properties that you will need, and to be able to just have a login system with CF_login. the very first button you will see on this page, which is this this button in this drop down that you're seeing right here, all of that is specified from this singular tag. The next little bit that you'll see on the page, which is just a little avatar, that is right here, just MGT person. So super simple integration mechanisms. And what's beautiful about this as well is the ability to just specify any resource and any endpoint along with any scope and to just build that right in. With the example that I have on my GitHub, I have a handful of event handlers that are used here. These are important because if you would like to have persistence with your ColdFusion sessions, here is where you would actually send over a token to your ColdFusion application, and you can have session persistence between your MS Graph application and your ColdFusion applications. I guess I will stop that right there because getting a little bit off topic from all things ColdFusion, but I do want to say with ColdFusion 2025 release, this bridges the gap for the community to be able to start building utilities and tools that tap into the MS Graph ecosystem very, very easily, such as what I've shown you today. So that being said, let me see if there's any questions. There are no questions. I guess I can go ahead and dive into one other demo. This example that I'm about to show, I do not have on my GitHub. However, I will get that live after this call is finished. This is a variant of the example that I do have publicly available, but this one is specifically used for SMTP. So a little bit of context on why I have an SMTP one is because I've seen a couple customers over the past few months run into a big headache of a situation where basic authentication is deprecated. If you find yourself in that situation, please reach out to me. I work with OAuth on a daily basis, so what might take someone a couple hours of headaches or even a full weekend of just patting your head against a wall, I could probably get you out of a jam in about an hour. I've done that with many other people, and I'm happy to help get you through some of these things because I know how painful they can be from firsthand experience. So this example, I'm going to come over to CF Entree again. I'm going to add in an application for SMTP example. And I will provide the same redirect URL that I had before. Here, I'm just going to there we go. So, I have my application pointed to the correct location. I'm going to give it an application name. In this example, I'm going to be selecting the SMTP. I'm going to give it the redirect URL like I did before and create the application. So, same process I took prior. I'm going to populate this EMV file. I'm going to select log into application. That is going to then bounce me over to Microsoft. I'm going to be presented with the consent screen, which first time logging into any application, you will be presented with this consent screen. One other very important note that I should mention is if you have an application that you've created and you have it running in a production scenario, don't change your scopes if you don't want to have user friction. Because if you modify the actual scopes that your application is using, users will be presented with this screen a second time. So depending on the number of users you have using that application, it can cause some little bit of friction. It's minor, but I figured I'd mention. So the only difference between this example and the example I showed earlier is the scopes and then this individual form. Really all that this is doing is allowing me to send an email, and I have very very down and dirty page that you get redirected to. Shows example, and this is the actual API call that's being performed. The variables that were previously set after I logged in. So I set the token into the session scope, pass that in, and along with a simple payload. So this is an example that I put together because I saw people run into deprecation of basic authentication, and they were, pretty much in a jam with email stopped working. So for obvious reasons, email is important. So that's why I have this example in place. I will get this live on my GitHub right after I finish up this call. So I'm moving a little bit quicker than I initially expected. So I guess it's probably be a good time for questions if anybody has any. Yeah, of course, Chris. I will. I'll actually get this live. Yeah, I'll do this after the call. But everybody on here, you have my word. I'll have this live on the examples in my GitHub right after.
Yeah, folks, let's get some questions for Michael. I know this is a complicated topic. And so probably a lot of you are just like sitting there with a little drool coming out of your mouth. But yeah, let's we've got Michael here for the rest of the morning here until the next knucklehead comes on here, which is me, at 12:15. So we've got some time for questions. There we go. There's one. Will this work for CF21 or 23?
This is specifically for ColdFusion 2025, unfortunately. However, there are many options you have if you are in a situation where you aren't going to be upgrading to 25 anytime soon. Hopefully you are. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. But if you're not, if you want to shoot me an email, I can coordinate with you and walk you through the options that you do have being on 2021 or 2023. So a little bit more work you have to do if you're not on 2025, but it's not impossible by any means. So I don't think it matters the license type that you have for being on 2025. I guess I'll defer to Mark on that, but I don't think there's any restrictions on standard versus enterprise, are there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the normal licensing quandaries versus like, whether it's allowable to be in a cluster or things like that. But the feature is available on standard as well, I believe. So it's as long as the rest of it's hunky-dory, then it should still be totally fine.
Cool. Brian, on looks like he had a question on, I got an email with Auth 0 recently about end-of-life notice requests without SNI will fail. So SNI is server name indication. That is something that's going to be configured at typically the web server level. To me, I read that as you need to have SNI and hostname validation when you're sending to that redirect URL that you get bounced back to, making sure that the host name and the SSL that's used both match. Kind of going off the top of my head here, but that's how I interpret that. So I don't have any firsthand experience with Auth 0, but making sure you have certificate hostname validation and SNI and IAS should get you around that. If you look at a binding instead of IAS, there is an option right here for require server name indication. So making sure that you have that checked along with a valid SSL certificate that has the domain name for the site you're working with should be more than sufficient for that. Does that answer your question, Brian? Never realized how many acronyms there are in IT until you start talking about things. Yes, I would say having that inside of your HD access or wherever your Apache directives live should be sufficient. A wildcard certificate should work with SNI, but having as long as the wildcard domain that it's using, the domain that you need SNI for is a subdomain of that, then you should be good with that as well. Cool. On the oh, you can go, Mark.
Oh no, I was just commenting that seemed to answer Carl's question.
Yeah, I definitely breezed through some of the demos a little bit quicker than I would have hoped to. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but if you guys want to see some live demos here with this toolkit, and I'm happy to do so, or we can do some tinkering with some of the code in ColdFusion 2025. Happy to be brave and do some live coding here.
Yeah, hop in, man. We've got time. Let's play around a little bit and show this stuff off, because I think this is an area that I think a lot of people are maybe nervous to play with and unsure about. So yeah, let's see it. Oh yeah, we got excitement from the crowd. They're fired up. So.
Yeah, I like that. So I guess to make this a little bit more interesting, why don't we do this? I'm going to look here, and there is about. Oh, well, I guess before I do this, do you guys want to see the MGT dev, or do you want to see stuff that is ColdFusion? I'm leaning towards yeah. So that being said, let's come over. So I'll just give you a quick rundown and a little bit more deep dive into the code that I have here. We can maybe do a little bit of tinkering. So to start bottom, we have the env file. This is not meant for production, people. I mean, it's not bad to use an env file, but there are better ways to go about things that I'm actually going to show right now. Probably makes the most sense. So I have a virtual server here that is running on Microsoft Cloud. There is a chicken and egg scenario when you're trying to eliminate credentials from your code. Because let's say we use a service like Key Vault. So if we look right here, one of these options is for integrating with Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault is a way to store secrets, certificates, anything that is, private information that needs to be securely stored via an API. Situation you get into, which is the chicken and egg scenario, which one came first, is how do you authenticate to that API? So one way to do that is there are services called Internal Metadata Service. At least on Microsoft, it's called IMS, Internal Metadata Service. GCP and AWS both have similar ones as well. But I have a couple components that are publicly available on my GitHub. One of them is for IMS, internal metadata service. You can use this internal metadata service to authenticate without doing anything. So literally the only code that's needed to authenticate is these two lines and then the component. But this is going to allow you to get an access token or bearer token to the resources that you need. And you don't have to do anything. Like you literally don't have to pass in any plain text credentials anywhere. The only thing that is considered plain text is the JWT or bearer token. So over here momentarily. Obviously feeling brave today with some live coding.
Yeah, you're a brave man. I have all my stuff pre-done.
Yeah. So let me come over to so this example right here, I'm just reading some basic information from the API, and this is the Azure Key Vault API I will mention. Let me come back over here. So this is using the internal metadata service to authenticate. I then get a token. There's another component that I have available on my GitHub that is for Azure Key Vault. I pass it a name for the Key Vault. There are some other permissions you need to set up. So I'll show you how to configure those in one moment. But after you have the name of the Key Vault and the token, you initialize the component, and then you can execute get secrets. So if you're in a scenario where you have a number of APIs with a number of authentication methods that you are using, I highly recommend looking at something like Azure Key Vault to store your secrets and your certificates to just manage all of these throughout your code. Because I work with thousands of companies. I see way too many plain text passwords. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself in the past, but I go through hell and high water to make sure that I do not have plain text secrets, because I advocate and squawk at people all the time saying, hey, no plain text passwords. You know, it's one thing if you're developing quickly and you're on your local environment, but even then, if you can avoid it, why not? And from my experience, this really does make your life easier, because now you have the means to track expirations for any secret or any password that you might need. A lot of times, you know, if you're following good practices, the secrets and passwords that you use will be time bound and they will expire at some point. How do you keep track of all that? A service like Key Vault drastically reduces the amount of work that you have to do in order to achieve that.
I have a quick question, Michael. So the whole Key Vault thing, I haven't had a ton of experience in it. What are the costs associated with having a Key Vault service in place? Like, what do they charge for ingress outgress per 1,000 authentications?
Yes, like, so it is per request based. I calculated it on running out, I want to say it was 2 million requests a month, and it was under $10 a month, assuming that you're caching things in your application or your session scope and you're not reading and grabbing that secret every single time. You're really not going to exceed that. Some of the other billing mechanisms that they have, such as certificates, they do charge you on like a per rotation basis. But I mean, if you're using something like Let's Encrypt and it's once every 3 months, you're having to pay $2 per rotation. Not that bad.
Not bad.
So as long as it's not a massive amount of API requests going to that Key Vault, you're not going to notice any significant cost.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing I'll
That's
mention,
useful to know.
is oh yeah, so 3 cents per 10,000 requests or operations. So that's it's pretty cheap.
That's cheap.
Microsoft looks at it as if we can give something that is easy to use and makes our customers more secure, it's better for them in the long run. And just because I drink the Kool-Aid, I'm spewing Microsoft this, Microsoft that. AWS and GCP, they have the exact same mechanisms. The terminology they use just might differ a little bit, but every major cloud provider on a modern cloud offers these services. Yeah, and then one thing I'll mention with some of the internal metadata service stuff that I mentioned, the reason I bring it up is because Mark brought up cost. There's things such as AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, which I've been using a lot recently, that essentially can be entirely free to your organization. And these things leverage services such as internal metadata service to authenticate to all of the other resources and APIs that they might need. So if you're under 1 million requests per month, if you have a low volume API or some scheduled tasks you have run behind the scenes, you can essentially run these things for nothing, zero. So and authenticating to all of these services, best way to do that is internal metadata service, which is OAuth. So I don't take it lightly when I say that this is an entryway into a whole world. It really is. And it reduces so much of the complexity. It's just getting over that learning curve.
And I think that's critical too. I think people think that it's an increase in complexity and difficulty, but honestly, like once you get over that hump and start to like use this stuff, actually it makes your life easier.
It does.
Like long term, if you're using basic auth and stuff, like you got to maintain and track and yeah, if someone like leaves your org or whatever, like it's so hard to keep track of all that stuff. So this type of automation is really critical, especially when you're scaling.
Yeah. Another basic auth that I saw get deprecated the other day was UPS. They had they pretty much lowered the things down to 1 request every 30 seconds for basic authentication. So if you are not using OAuth authentication, you cannot do more than 1 request every 30 seconds, which that's obviously a very low rate limit. Ended up having to help someone out of a bind there, and the solution was OAuth. So
yeah, that's an interesting way. I don't know why they would have done that. I would get very frustrated as a developer because it would work once and then not work, and then later it would work, right?
Well, I've experienced that with large cloud providers where it seems almost a little unethical, but I mean, they kind of scare you into making that next step where they give you a little scare. And they say they do a canary rollout where they roll it out to 5 or 10% of accounts or whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, okay, I got the email, but I didn't respond, and now it's time to respond. So yeah, the sooner you can react to those emails that you get when they say basic authentication is getting deprecated, don't wait till last minute because you'll hate yourself.
Yeah, well, I'll take the L on that for ColdFusion. We actually, it took us a very long time to get our basic auth like fixed up, and it was very, very last minute. Like I was yelling at someone on Christmas vacation as the clock was ticking down to get it out there. So that I'm going to take that one on the chest and say that might have been our fault for a lot of last minute Christmas
sometimes
coding.
that's all you can do. So I'm not pointing fingers. The reason why I'm saying this is because I'm speaking from experience. I've done that myself. So it's not pleasant to learn from my mistakes, learn from Mark's mistakes. It's something that if you can avoid,
it's all good. But I mean, now we're getting this stuff integrated. It's easier than it's ever been in the past.
Exactly.
And then with tools like what you guys are putting out there, this is the direction we need to go in, right? Like making it dead simple to do authentication the right way. even for, just day-to-day apps, right? If you can just make it easier than just kind of, whatever, slop coding some username, password, clear text junk, then why not do it the right way?
Exactly.
And I think that's really the secret. So we're at 12 o'clock. And I don't think there's any more questions. I haven't seen any more pop up. So let's give Michael a hand for an amazing talk on a really complex and difficult topic here, folks. He really he made it clear, and I think helped out a lot of people. I think it was very useful for a lot of folks. Definitely take him up on his offer to help you out. Because this guy really lives and breathes this stuff, and I know a lot of us have had difficulty over the years trying to kind of make our brains work in this context. So leverage your experts here, folks. So very cool. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Let's see.